What is going on, guys? Welcome back. In today's video, we're going to talk about ChatGPT and why it's not going to replace us as programmers yet. So let us get right into it. All right, everyone's talking about it, everyone's making videos about it, everyone's impressed by it, everyone's using it, and what this tool is capable of is really mind-blowing to the point where a lot of people think, a lot of programmers think they might be replaced soon by it. I'm talking about ChatGPT, the new AI chatbot by OpenAI, based on the GPT 3.5 language model, and this tool is really crazy. It can do a lot of things, it's very impressive. And in today's video, I want to showcase the features. I want to showcase a couple of use cases, what it can do for you. I want to show you guys how impressive the results can be. But I also want to talk a little bit about why I don't think that ChatGPT will replace programmers soon. So let's get right into it. I have prepared a couple of points that I want to cover here. This is the interface. If you want to use ChatGPT, you go to openai.com. Currently, you can try it for free. You just have to create an account. You have to provide a phone number, and then you can play around with it. And it can do very, very interesting things. You can already see here a couple of examples. Explain quantum computing in simple terms. You can just click on it. Then it's going to paste the text down here. You can press enter, and then it's going to give you the explanation. This is like the example that they provide, but you can type everything you want, and you can have multiple chats here on the left. I'm going to delete this one now. I'm going to start a new one, and we can do something very basic, like write a number guessing game in Python. So a number guessing game essentially generates a random number and asks the user for a guess, and then it says, okay, your guess is too low, your guess is too high, and we have a certain number of tries or something. I'm not writing any code right now. ChatGPT is writing the full game for me, and you can see that this seems reasonable. We import random, we generate an integer between 1 and 100, number of guesses equals 0, while true, ask for a guess, increase the number of guesses. If the guess is correct, print that it's correct and break out of the loop. Otherwise, say it's too high or too low. That's a number guessing game. And the good thing about this chatbot here is that it also knows about the context. So I can just add some information. I can say, hey, please include this feature as well. And it will know what I'm talking about because it showed me that code. And for example, I can say, please add a maximum number of tries. And I can say this should be 10. And check that the user does not guess more than 10 times. And then it will take the code it just wrote and it's going to extend it by the feature that I just provided. And you can see it's writing right now. Currently, it's a little bit slower than usual. Maybe it's because they're limiting the speed of them all because so many people are using it. But you can see now it introduced the variable max guesses equals 10. It was not here before. And it will also include a mechanism for checking if the number of guesses is above that max guesses. So you can see it writes the code itself, and then it can also extend the code. It can fix bugs. It can change things. This is quite impressive. So for simple stuff like this works perfectly fine. I can tell you right away, if you try to do something very complex, it will not be able to do that. I have played around with certain complex tasks. For example, I wanted to implement Minesweeper. So I said, hey, please provide a Minesweeper game in Python. And the problem with ChatGPT is, and this is why I don't think it will replace us anytime soon, is that oftentimes it gives you solutions that look quite right. They look very correct, but they're wrong, or they're incomplete. So for example, you will say, okay, give me a Minesweeper game. And what it will do, it will write you a Python script confidently and will tell you, okay, this is a Minesweeper implementation. You have the different fields, you have mines or not mines. And you also have these neighboring fields that display numbers depending on how many mines are around them. But then you try to run the code, it works, it compiles, or in the case of Python, it runs without giving you any errors. But then you click on a field, it says, okay, you won or you lost. And there's no game there, right? There's no Minesweeper. But it doesn't tell you, hey, I don't know how to implement Minesweeper. It just gives you something and tells you that's how you do it. And oftentimes you have to tell it 5 times that it's wrong and that this part is not correct. Sometimes it doesn't even change it at all, no matter how many times you tell it. So when it goes to very complex things, it's not as powerful as a lot of people think it is. Especially if you get into solving quite complex problems, it fails to do it right now. So if you really want to do something that's difficult. You still need a human brain to do it, as of right now. So let's look at a couple more examples that are quite impressive. What I use it oftentimes for is I know a new library, or I find a new library online and I want to know how to use it. So for example, I might want to play around with the library Plot9 that I recently made a video on. So show me some example code of how to use the Plot9 package in Python. And then it gives me an example so that I know, okay, this is essentially how I do it. And this is, in my opinion, way better than just Googling or using Stack Overflow most of the time, at least for simple sample code. The reason for that is that for such simple tasks like showcasing an example of a plot, this is a very powerful tool. So if ChatGPT is going to replace something, it's not going to be programmers, it's going to be Google and maybe Stack Overflow, at least for simple tasks. Because now, instead of just Googling Plot9 or simple graph Plot9, I'm just going to go to ChatGPT and ask, can you show me some code samples of Plot9? And I can do the same thing for show me some sample code of using linear regression in sklearn, whatever, and it will give me an example. And even if it's not exactly what I want to do, I at least know roughly what do I have to import, what parameters do I need to specify. So I might have a complex problem with a complex data set, but I know now, okay, I can load with pandas, read CSV, I can split like this, and I can import the model from linear model, and I can do the predictions like that, and I have a score method, just the very basics. Instead of looking up the documentation, instead of going on YouTube looking for a quick tutorial, instead of going to Google or Stack Overflow to find some sample code, I can just ask ChatGPT, and it gives me some blueprint, you could say. Now let's move on to something that's even more impressive. Doesn't work all the time. This needs to be said as well. It doesn't work all the time, but it works well enough most of the time if you have simple code. For example, I have R code here. I have the following R code, and I can provide it down here. What I do here is I just import two libraries. I load a data set called auto. I set a seed. I do a train test split. I build a linear model based on that data, predicting MPG based on the horsepower. I'm doing the predictions, and then I'm computing the root mean squared error. And now I can go ahead and say, please translate this code above into Python code. Again, if it gets too complex, it doesn't work perfectly, but you can see essentially it realizes what is being done here. It realizes that I'm building a linear model, which is why it includes or imports linear regression. It realizes that I'm computing the mean squared error, so it imports the mean squared error. It also realizes that I'm actually computing the root mean squared error, so it imports sqrt from math. It also does a train test split. It also sets the random state, which is the seed here. So even though the syntax and the functions are different, you can see that this is a translation of the code above. It does the exact same thing. Now, the only difference is, of course, I don't have the auto data set inside of Python as I do it in R, as I do have it in R. So it imports it from a CSV file, which you need to have, obviously, but the rest is perfectly translated. So this is very, very powerful. There's no other tool I know that can do that like this. And what I really enjoy as well, and this is another example here, ChatGPT is not only for writing code. It can also write mathematical stuff. It can also write even stuff that is not related to computer science at all. So you can go and write, give me the best 3 psychology papers on I don't know, on neuroticism or something. And then you say, okay, from those 3 papers that you find, give me a summary with 5 key insights or something. So for example, I will do that with a computer science paper here because it's more suited to the channel. But there is a paper called, I wrote it down here, Dota 2 with large-scale deep reinforcement learning. A paper where a guy played Dota 2, or a team of people played Dota 2 with an AI that was trained using reinforcement learning. And I want to know what this paper is about, and I want to have a short summary in 5 bullet points of that paper. So what I can do is summarize the paper, and I can provide a title, Dota 2 with large-scale deep learning reinforcement. That's the name of the paper, in 5 bullet points. Focus on the key insights. And now it takes the paper and it summarizes it. The authors used deep reinforcement learning to do this. The AI agent was able to learn the game by playing against itself using a technique called self-play, and so on and so forth. It gives me some very surface level information, but I can say, please explain point 2 in more detail. And then it will take this and it will explain to me what self-play is. So self-play is a machine learning technique and so on and so forth. And this is quite impressive because it doesn't just write code, it gives me summarization of books, of papers, sometimes of well-known videos maybe. If you have something that's well-known, this model was trained on the internet itself, not on the current version, so it's not able to browse data that is current. This is a weakness, of course, but at the time, I think it was 2021, at the time it was trained on the internet, so whatever is popular and well-known, it will know about it and it can summarize it. And you don't even have to specify the paper yourself. You can say, list 3 major papers on deep learning for computer vision or something. You can do it like this. And here it provides me then 3 papers that are well-known with a title, with a short description of what this paper is about. And then I can say, please summarize the second paper you listed in 6 bullet points. And this is how you can do research. This is how you can what do you call it? You look for different papers. Of course, if you want to go into detail, you read the full paper, but maybe you're just looking for papers. Maybe you're just looking for ideas for papers. Maybe you have to write something and you need to have some sources, but you don't know what sources you want to use. So you just want to skim through the different papers and you want to have a basic summary to know what they're about, to get the essence of the papers. And this is what you can do here with ChatGPT. This is very, very powerful and very impressive. Another thing that I want to show you is you can also use it, sometimes at least, to troubleshoot the code. So I'm going to just ignore this now. I'm going to start a new chat, and I'm going to say I have the following Python code. I will copy some code that I prepared here, and this is basically code where I get number 1, number 2 as an input from the user. We're going to get them as floating point numbers. I'm going to check, I have a result number that I want to check for, and I'm doing the check if number 1 plus number 2 equals this number. And if that's the case, the sum is correct. And if it's not the case, the sum is not correct. So the sum that I want to achieve is 0.3. So one thing that I could do, theoretically, in mathematics is I can pass 0.1 and 0.2. So 0.1 plus 0.2 is 0.3, so this should be correct. Now, those of you who know a little bit about computer science and floating point rounding errors and stuff like that, and have watched maybe my video on it, know what is going to go wrong in this code here. It's not going to give me an exception, it's just going to say the sum is not correct when I enter 0.1 and 0.2. And I don't know why that is, let's say. So I'm just going to say, for some reason, this code above prints the sum is not correct, even though it should be. What could be the problem? There are a few potential issues here, and here you can see now that it lists a couple of things. So I didn't provide the input, so of course many different things can be the issue here. What does it say here? You can check the printing if these variables are not type float. There you go. So now it's also worth noting that comparing floating point numbers for equality can be problematic due to the way they're represented in computer memory. And maybe I don't understand what he's saying, what the model is saying, so I can say, okay, why does it return false? Or why does it say it is not correct when I enter 0.1 and 0.2? The sum should be 0.3. And then you're correct, the sum of 0.1 and 0.2 should be 0.3. However, as I mentioned in my previous response, and then it explains the floating point representation problem, which is exactly why the script doesn't work. And it also provided a solution here for how we can circumvent it. So we can just ask if the difference is smaller than some tolerance that we have here. So it explains exactly what is happening here. This is also quite powerful. Of course, it doesn't work if the error is very complex and hidden and not so obvious. So this, again, needs a human brain to be solved properly. What else can we do? We can do stuff like writing blog posts based on the AI. So I can just say I want to have a blog post. Let's open up a new thread here. Write a blog post on linear regression. I want to have 5 headings representing 5 different sections. I'm going to provide introduction, theory, implementation, let's say implementation in Python, experiments, and conclusion, for example. Each section should have 2 to 3 paragraphs with 3 or 4 to 5 sentences each. The implementation section should also have code samples in Python using sklearn. So that's just what I want, and now it's going to go ahead and write a blog post. Now, one thing that's important here is that it will not always do exactly what you want. So I will say now I want to have 5 sections. It's going to give me 5 sections, but it's not going to give me necessarily 2 to 3 paragraphs with 4 to 5 sentences each, usually by default. So you can see here introduction only has 1 paragraph. However, I can just, after the model is done writing, I can just say, okay, I want to have 2 more paragraphs for the introduction section or something, and then it's going to do it. So sometimes you need to demand what you want to have multiple times, and then it's going to do it. But I don't think that that's really a problem, because it writes a full blog post for you and you can just change it a little bit. You can also just start writing text. So you can take something that you have already written and say, please continue this text, and then it's going to write the blog post. But you can see here, it writes a linear regression example where we build a model, we predict and stuff like that. And you can see that this is quite impressive. It just gives me a blog post blueprint, at least, that I can use to write something. And to be honest, now it stopped writing because probably the response is too long, and I think for the preview it just stops. But actually I have used ChatGPT for some of my videos, not because I'm incapable of doing the videos myself, but sometimes it's just simpler when I prepare a video on a library to just Google briefly some examples instead of going to the using ChatGPT to generate some examples instead of going to Google and trying to find out, okay, what do I need to do to accomplish this and that in that library? Because that's not really knowledge that I need. This is just something that I have to Google, and this is not logical, right? It's not that you have to be educated to know about this. You just have to Google it, and instead of Googling it, you can just say, hey, I'm preparing a video on XYZ. Give me some code samples that showcase the major features of this library. And this is quite useful for preparing videos. I have used it myself, and for writing blog posts, this is also a good starting point. So what else can we do? We can also write tests, automated tests for code. So I can go ahead, for example, take something like this. Let me just open up a new chat. I have the following code, and then I have this Python code here where I have add, sub, mul, and diff, those basic arithmetic operations. Please write tests for the code above, and maybe you want to say write unit tests for the code above. And then it's going to just import unit tests, and it's going to write tests for these functions here. And you can see it does that automatically. And this is something that is really useful, especially when you have a lot of generic tests that are not so complex, that don't have to, that don't involve a lot of logical thinking. You can just automate it instead of writing it yourself. This is quite powerful as well. And then what do I have here? This is also very interesting. I really like that. The last thing that I want to show you here from the things that worked for me quite well is you can also use ChatGPT for mathematical proofs. Now, again, up to a certain point, if the proof is super complicated and not well known, probably it will fail to prove whatever you're trying to prove. But if you want to prove something like, for example, that the square root of 2 is irrational, there is a proof by contradiction, an indirect proof that you can use. You say, okay, if the number is rational, it has to be represented as a fraction, stuff like that, and then you go and prove that the square root of 2 cannot be represented by a fraction. But if you want ChatGPT to do that for you, you can just say prove that the square root of 2 is irrational, and then it's going to give you a mathematical proof by contradiction. As you can see here, assume that the square root of 2 is rational. That means it can be expressed as a fraction. It shows that this is not the case because there is no combination where this works, because a squared divided by b squared is 2. That does not exist, essentially. And then it proves that this is not a possibility. However, what we can also do here, because this looks quite messy, is we can say, take this proof above and write it into a well-designed markdown file with LaTeX formulas. And then you can see it uses a heading. It also will use the actual formula symbols. I mean, here you can see it uses the $sign, but it doesn't really display it. So it's not going to render on the web, but if you take that and put it into a markdown file, you're going to see the actual formulas with this mathematical notation here. So that's also quite interesting. Now, let us talk a little bit about the things that did not work so well. I'm not sure if I'm going to show all of them. We can try to reproduce some of the things that it didn't manage to do. But there are a couple of things that I wanted to do with ChatGPT that I did not succeed to do because it just became too complex, even though it is not necessarily too complex. So it's not something where you say, okay, even a human would have, even a human would have a hard time solving this. It's actually quite doable, but especially when ChatGPT is not very sure about the language. So especially when I work with R, or even I had for university, I had to work with a language called NetLogo, and I tried to do something in NetLogo. And this is a very, very unknown language, a very niche language, not well known. It really fails to do that. So whenever you have to program with a library or with a language that is not well known, ChatGPT produces very bad results. And the problem is it doesn't tell you, hey, I don't know how to do that. It tells you, here is how you do that. And it starts using functions that don't exist. It starts passing parameters that don't exist. And you have to troubleshoot more. You have to spend more time debugging and troubleshooting than you would have to spend time coding the thing yourself. So let's just see if I can reproduce some of those things. Write a simple Minesweeper game in Python. Now, ChatGPT definitely knows the rules of Minesweeper, so I don't need to explain the details. But essentially, it fails to do that. At least for me, it did. Maybe it will succeed now. But it just does something that is not really Minesweeper for the implementation. And if I say, okay, but I need those extra rules, it kind of implements them. So if I say, for example, okay, for each field that is not a mine, I need to see a number that indicates how many mines are neighboring that field. It will do something that adds some numbers to the fields, and it somehow applies to the rule, but it will not be a Minesweeper game. But to be honest, ChatGPT doesn't even try to be that tool that just writes code for you. It's more an assistant. So if you tell it build a Minesweeper game, it's not going to do that, but that's also not what it aims to do. So you need to be fair about this point here. What else can we do? We can try to do something. This is also something that I wanted to do. Generate or write a Python script that generates a solvable Sudoku puzzle with some fields missing. And the problem with this one here is that it writes the code. I don't know if it's going to do the same thing that it did before, but what it did before is it wrote the code that generated a Sudoku puzzle that had some empty fields and had some filled fields, and there were no contradictions. So the individual fields did not contradict with each other, but if you take that and put it into a Sudoku solver, it says there is no valid solution because it just didn't check for that. So this code right here, I'm pretty sure will not generate the Sudoku puzzle that I'm looking for, because it doesn't think about all the constraints. So that's one thing that it also cannot do. Another thing that's quite interesting is there was a Stack Overflow thread on banned responses. So maybe we can see that Stack Overflow ChatGPT banned. Maybe I can find that. Temporary policy, ChatGPT is banned. And this is quite telling, because the reason it was banned is because the average rate of getting correct answers from ChatGPT is too low. And I think it's somewhere mentioned. There you go. They typically look like they might be good and are very easy to produce. That's the problem. That's the major problem with ChatGPT right now. Oftentimes when you try to do something, it will never tell you, almost never tell you, I cannot do that, or I'm not sure about this. It will always give you a solution, and this solution will oftentimes use functions, as I mentioned, or parameters that just don't work. Or it will do something that seems to work, like producing a Sudoku puzzle that seems like, hey, look, I have a Sudoku puzzle, but this is unsolvable, even though I demanded a solvable one. So this model is far from replacing programmers. It's really not as good as people think it is. It is very powerful. It's more powerful than any other tool that we have seen up until this point, but it's far from replacing intelligent humans, intelligent programmers. Really far away from that. What else do we have here? Yeah, that's basically it for my example. So I prepared a couple of things that I wanted to show you here that do work, a couple of experiences that I had that did not work. So ChatGPT failed to essentially do what I tasked it to do. And this brings me, I guess, to my final conclusion. It's a very powerful tool. You should use it. It makes you way more efficient. For me, it solved a lot of problems, especially when it comes to preparing videos, getting some sample code, doing some mundane things, getting familiar with a certain library or API that is well known. This is a very powerful tool. Also for just doing some basic stuff like, I need some basic structure. Implement a menu with those points. It's going to do that without problems. Or I have these files, please automate or write a script that automatically change the names according to this pattern, or provide a regular expression that does this and that. It does that almost perfectly, and there's nothing to complain here. But if you demand it, or if you expect it to solve complex tasks and to replace programmers, it's not going to do that anytime soon. Now, having said that, this is running on GPT 3.5, which is basically GPT-3, but a little bit enhanced. GPT-4 might be coming soon, maybe in 2023, and this model might be way more powerful than GPT-3 and GPT 3.5. So we don't know if the future model will be able to replace us. It's unknown, it's uncertain, but this ChatGPT, as of right now, is far from replacing us. It will probably, if it gets better and better, definitely replace Google, definitely replace any other auto-completion engine that we know. Everything like Copilot is basically useless if you have ChatGPT, and it might replace a lot of Stack Overflow to some degree, even though at the moment Stack Overflow is still the better choice if you actually want to have a correct solution. So if you want to do things properly, Stack Overflow is superior to ChatGPT. But it's just nice to play around with it. It's nice to solve basic tasks. You can also do stuff that is not related to programming. You can say, hey, I have in my fridge this vegetable and this meat and this these nuts here. Okay, this was, I didn't intend to do the joke. But you can just list a couple of things that you have in your fridge, and you can say, okay, I want to have ideas for meals. So I can say, for example, I have in my fridge some peppers, a cucumber, cheese, and chicken. Provide some ideas for recipes. Something like that. So especially for brainstorming, this is also a nice use case. If you want to have ideas for projects, for GitHub portfolio projects to showcase your skills, or even if you have, if you want to have new video ideas for your YouTube channel. I also use this for brainstorming, even though it didn't come up with super unique ideas. It did provide some interesting impulses. Let's put it like that. So it's nice to use it as a boilerplate code, but if you want to actually do something complex, you should always understand what you're doing. I think the final conclusion is it will probably not replace us soon. And if you use it, you should definitely know what you're talking about. So I would use it for stuff that I already know how to do, but I don't want to do from scratch. So for example, I exactly know how to implement some complex neural network structure in TensorFlow, but I'm not going to do it myself. I'm going to say, hey, give me a structure, and then I'm going to check if the code that was generated is actually useful or not. So you never want to use it for something that you have no clue about. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it and hope you learned something. If so, let me know by hitting the like button and leaving a comment in the comment section down below. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell to not miss a single future video for free. Other than that, thank you much for watching. See you in the next video, and bye.